but not all powerful. Argument from suffering, which we'll get into in a minute. And if a being knows everything past, present, and future and is going to punish you for what you do in your life, you know, is that really an ethical way to handle things? So I think that an all-loving being who punishes people for eternity, I don't think that's the hallmark of an all-good being, especially if it's all-knowing. Like, for example, if you consider atheism a cardinal sin, which I'll be going to hell for, well, I've only been atheist for all my life, minus maybe 12 years or so. So eternal punishment for that, even that amount of finite sin, that makes absolutely no sense. And when I talk about suffering, I'm not talking about like I've been battling depression for 3 or 4 years, or I'm having a bad day. Instead, what I'm talking about is some of the most extreme suffering. Like, for example, I don't know if you guys are aware of what's happening in Darfur right now, but in some regions of Africa, it's not uncommon for 90% of the women to have been raped, often brutally. So, you're talking about an all-knowing, all-loving, all-powerful being that would have the ability to stop that, would have the motivation to stop that, and would have the power to stop that, and yet it doesn't. So I think to allow for that, the being either can't know about it, which is doubtful because I know about it, all-knowing, not all-powerful, they can't stop it, or just doesn't really care. First one I'm going to talk about presence of evil amongst people. The kind of retorts I've heard is, first one is free will. The deity, for whatever reason, treasures our free will, the power to choose good and evil, more than, our lives, I guess, which I don't really buy, because if I look at it from the perspective of my daughter, if my daughter goes around beating the crap out of kids on the playground, I can't have that, especially if she's telling people that I told her to. So, I would have to intervene in that. I respect my daughter's free will, but I can still intervene in ways that would be more of a mentor type thing, like mediating conflicts and, punishing people as soon as their bad deeds have been done, to show that yes, there is punishment for that. It's also been told to me that because good and evil are relative to each other, they each need something to be relative to. I guess this also kind of goes along with the character building argument. Suffering, pain teaches the value of life. I guess I'll do that later. But just because something might be very intricately intertwined doesn't mean that they're necessarily inseparable. If a friend of mine is going through a hard time, needs rent money or money to eat, I can give him like $150 without ever really, without that sort of evil that I mentioned earlier in the world. I've heard that the suffering is an illusion. I've heard of people saying that there's some sort of master plan. Well, without knowing the master plan, I can't judge for myself if this is something that I really want to get behind, because obviously I can't worship an evil god. So I find this unconvincing just because it's not really an argument. Same thing with suffering is an illusion, because they're going to a better place anyways. I think that's more dismissing the problem than actually dealing with it, and I'll kind of talk about that on the next slide a little bit. But the other one that I've heard is pain teaches the value of life, which might be true. I think the situation in Darfur goes far above and beyond character building. I'm a very moral, principled person, and I have never really been. I talked about the abusive relationship earlier, but everybody's still alive, and the only scars are mental and not physical. I was never in any real danger from the person I was living with. So I don't really value that. Plus, even if that is true, does that still make the person a good person? Anybody a fan of the Saw movies? Tobin Bell's character? That's why he does what he does, because he believes that he can teach people to value their lives if he makes them suffer. And I don't think anybody would argue that Jigsaw is anything but a villain in those movies, although he is kind of portrayed as an anti-hero, American horror. Presence of evil in nature. I kind of talk about vector-borne diseases, and I think, even though I mentioned elephantiasis just because it's horrible, I think a better example of this is onchocerciasis. The reason why river blindness exists, and this is like one of the most prevalent causes of transmissible blindness in the world, the reason why this disease exists is because of a nematode that lives specifically in humans. There is no other way for this nematode to live. You are not going to find Onchocerca volvulus in the soil. The only place you're ever going to find this is in Homo sapiens. Basically what happens is the adults enter in through the bite of a sandfly and then start spewing out millions of microfilariae, because sandflies are about yay big. You can barely even see them. And to get it in a bite, to get larvae in a bite to go on to the next host, you actually have to spew out enough microfilariae to have, the larvae in the side of the bite when the fly bites you. So you have to have a lot of microfilariae. And what happens is the nematodes don't actually cause the disease. What happens is when the nematodes die, they start to break apart, and they have these symbionts in their reproductive system, which they can't reproduce without, and your immune system basically goes crazy over these. And what happens in river blindness is they sometimes work their way into the optic nerve and just die there, old age or whatever. And your immune system goes nuts and eventually scars over your optic nerve and blinds you. So, and this isn't a disease that can take a while to get to this point. There are kids as young as 5 who have lost their sight due to this disease and will never be able to produce for their families, and thus are destined to live a life of poverty in many cases. Another one that I find particularly interesting is Toxoplasma gondii. Everybody in here planning on having a kid? Anybody in here have cats? Well, if you ever have a cat and either you're pregnant or your spouses are pregnant, don't let them change the litter box. Remember the free will argument? Well, this, as I said, I don't really find that convincing because of this parasite. This is a parasite that it's kind of an interesting parasite. It changes the behavior of its hosts. In mice, which is its intended host, it actually makes the mouse seek out cat urine, so it gets eaten and moves on to the next host. Which, mice actually feel pain, so why do animals need to suffer in nature? But I'm focusing on the human element here, so I'm not going to get into that. But in humans, it actually changes behavior as well. There's some pretty convincing evidence out there to state that it makes women more